Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Missions Podcast. I'm Maggie, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Josh Gamble, the director of the Canadian MK Network, who's here today to share with us and help us better understand missionaries' kids, or MKs, and the realities they navigate. We've titled today's episode, MKs, the Unthought of People Group. All right, welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, Josh. Thanks for being with us today.
Good to be here.
So just to get us started, could you give us a quick introduction to the MORE Network?
The MORE Network is a Canada-wide collaborative of close to 40 organizations, so mission agencies, like sending agencies, some universities, and denominations. And so we collaborate together to resource and equip and care for cross-cultural workers, CCWs, missionaries, and their kids. So we provide pre-field training, so language acquisition, cross-cultural readiness, kind of equipping for missionaries and their kids going to the field or going to live cross-culturally. And then on returning to Canada, their passport country, we invite missionaries and their kids to experience a debriefing retreat or a re-entry retreat for MKs. And so, we believe very strongly in collaboration and prayer, showing the compassion of God to missionaries and MKs. And we really believe we're stronger together, which is why we partner together across Canada with various churches, denominations. And so all of our resources, retreats, etc., are available to anyone beyond our members. But we love to partner together. And so the Canadian MK Network, which is where I'm the director of, is a part of the MORE Network. And MORE stands for Missionary Opportunities for Resourcing and Equipping. So if you're wondering, like, what is it? More of Jesus, more help for missionaries? It is those things, but it actually stands for Missionary Opportunities for Resourcing and Equipping. So.
Amazing. Well, if that sounds familiar to any of you listening, wouldn't surprise me. We have mentioned MORE multiple times throughout the years. We love to partner with them, and we're so glad to have Josh with us today. Josh, I'm curious if you could share just a little bit about how you got involved with MORE personally.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a missionary's kid myself. I grew up in Bangladesh and India and moved to Canada when I was 15. Fast forward about 10 years, I was in college in my first year of university, and the prof was asking us, I was in pastoral ministry, and he was asking us, who has God called you to serve? And on my page, I was kind of racking my brain, and he said, don't overthink it, just write it down. Write down what comes to mind as we're praying and entering into this. And so I wrote down, Christians that don't know Christ, people who grow up in the church but don't know Jesus, which was my story. Young men, because I was 25, I thought I was pretty mature at the time. And I wrote down MKs, missionaries' kids. And it seemed like a throwaway moment to me. I wrote those things down and moved on. But it was 5 minutes later, I was, checking my email, as one does in the first year of their undergrad. And I got an email from a lady named Cindy, and she said, hey, Josh, we've never met, but I heard you're an MK, and we have this thing called Reboot. It's a re-entry program for MKs ages 17 to 20. Maybe you'd like to come and be staff. And I was like, wow, fired up. I didn't connect it with what I'd written down, but I was like, fired up. I'm going to bless these kids. And so I showed up at Reboot to bless these kids and serve and help. So I'd just become a Christian, 2 years earlier. And I realized I didn't know anything about my own MK experience growing up in the bustling metropolis, 26 million person city of Dhaka, Bangladesh. And so I was really surprised by the prayer and the love and the depth of the staff team that was there. I was in my 20s trying to figure out my way. And they were just focused on stewarding me and caring for me as a staff. And so I was deeply impacted by my time at Reboot. And I began to be mentored by the founder of MORE Network, Paul Dyke, who's been on this podcast before. And fast forward, 8-9 years later, I was invited to consider being the director of the MK Network. And this is where the Lord brought me. So here I am.
So I actually had the incredible privilege of serving with Josh as the co-director of Reboot a couple of years ago. And I couldn't believe, as I sat through Reboot, and I was serving and working it, and I have done pretty extensive MK training and care in the past. And so I sort of went into it with this attitude of like, oh yeah, this is old hat. I've already kind of got a feel for all of this. And I could not believe how much it impacted me. Just as I was sitting in on the sessions and kind of helping to lead a small group through the experience and everything else, it just really, really touched me and my own story of growing up in ministry. And I was so shocked at how deeply that impacted me and what a special week that became for me, as I feel like I laid some of my own old grievances to rest. And I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit more about your own story, Josh, and how Reboot affected you personally.
Yeah, well, I think, when I moved back to Canada as a 14, 15-year-old, I didn't have Reboot. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have any relationships or resources or really time set aside to process my experience. And so effectively, when I moved to Canada, if my life was a piece of paper, which I don't have, I usually will do a thing. Like, my life was a piece of paper. I just folded it up and put it away and said, well, that whole part of my life isn't helpful to me here as I moved to Canada. I just need to figure this out on my own and behave and belong and fit in without understanding, because I didn't even know I could understand that part of my life, because you don't know what you don't know. And so you just try to move on and kind of survive. And so being at Reboot, there were a lot of, I think, like principles or themes or aspects of being a TCK, aspects of being an MK that were a part of who I was that I didn't even understand, didn't even know. And I'll touch on one of those a little bit later on. That's really fascinating.
Do you have like a favorite story over the years from the MKs that you've seen come through Reboot?
There's so many stories, honestly. Every year at Reboot, we're like, it can't get any better, can it? And then like the next year, it's like, whoa, that was amazing. I'll say this: MKs come to Reboot with a variety of attitudes and a variety of experiences. And a lot of them, the first day, they're kind of like sussing it out. Like, I don't know about this Reboot thing. But again, the shared experience is huge for them. And so really a huge blessing. The story that stands out to me is of an MK named Matthew. And he had an experience that was characterized by a lot of relational turmoil. So he, grew up in a family of sibling boys and really struggled to make friends as a kid. And then, finally made friends and then moved overseas to do missions. Struggled to make friends overseas, finally made friends, and then back to Canada. And so his life was this sort of stream of relational kind of tears that were taking place. And so when he came to Reboot, long hair in front of his face, kind of like, whatever, I don't know if I want to be here. And one of the things that we do, one of the activities we do at Reboot, Classic Reboot, is called the Grief Plan. And that's an opportunity for MKs to look at their life and to, we talked about truth earlier, look at the whole truth of their life, the good stuff and the hard stuff, and to truly face it. We give them prompts and to, invite God in and to write these things down, and then they get to share it with another MK, one of the staff. And Matthew had written his grief plan down, and he came up to me and wanted to share it. But I was sitting on the floor of this classroom, and he kind of, looked over at me and kind of mumbled, and I want a grief plan. I was like, what are we doing? Like, do you want to share it? Do you not want to share it? Like, he's like, I want to share it, but I'm just so angry. Like, I don't know if I can. And so we went outside, beautiful, summer day. And I took another staff with me. And in my mind, I'm like, this guy needs to like shout to the heavens, like, get out the anger. Did not happen. But what did happen was this young MK, 17, and myself and another staff, we sat together and we encouraged him. We said, Matthew, we've been where you are. We understand it is hard. Just start with the first thing you've written down. And so he started with the first thing. And as he shared that, the tears flowed. And he kept going, and he just wept. He'd never shared any of this with anyone, any of these painful moments. And after, 10, 20 minutes, we moved on and went to the next session. And that evening, we had a barbecue outside, and he came and he said to me, he says, Josh, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened, but I feel different. He's like, I can feel more emotions, and I can connect with the other people here. And then he like surprise hugged me, and I was like, not expecting a hug from him. But you could visibly see the change in his face. Whereas at the beginning of the week, his hair was down and he's like this. My picture of him from that week of Reboot is his head up and his hair back and this huge smile, like a glow on his face. And so we get to see that with dozens and dozens of young adult MKs and teen MKs every year. And it's just like, I wish I had that when I was an MK and I moved back to Canada, so really meaningful. We have another, if I can just share another quick story. We have a program called Review that the More Network runs, and Review is designed for families. It's a third-party debriefing retreat, similar to Reboot for the 17 to 20-year-old teens or young adults. Review is for the family, adults, singles as well, but also families with kids up to 17. And I got to help out with a night of worship and praise at a review retreat happening near Calgary. And I went there and we had this beautiful night of music and worship. And then at the end of it, I was just sitting there strumming my guitar, playing lightly, and people are mulling around. And I looked over and I saw this family, a parent, a father and a mother, a husband and wife, and their, I think, probably 12 or 13-year-old son. They had two other kids, but they weren't there. And the three of them were sitting there and they were just weeping together. They were just feeling the pain of saying goodbye to this life that they had lived overseas. And they got to feel those emotions together as a family. And when I think about my family moving to Canada, I don't remember having a conversation about what this would be like and what this would really mean for us. And so that always stands out to me because I'm like, missionaries need this. They're not superhuman. They're people with rich experiences. And we have an opportunity as the church to do better, to debriefing is so important. Transition retreats, reentry retreats are so important. Like there's a better way than just a pat on the back, a prayer, and thank you for serving for all these years, at a church service. That's great. But the answer is not less than that. It's more than that. And so there's an opportunity to work together to see that MKs and missionaries have a better transition and a healthy transition so they can continue to serve Jesus wherever he's calling them to serve.
Well, you've been at like 10 of these reboots now over the years, and that is a lot of MKs to see in the midst of their own turmoil and their own transition. What are some of the themes that you've seen sort of emerge across the MK experience more broadly? Not just yours, but what have you seen? Like, oh, we all seem to hit this kind of a moment together.
Yeah, that's a great question, Maggie. You see a lot of recurring themes, and in some ways the mission world has changed as the world has changed, right? The world's become smaller in a sense with technology and communication kind of permeating every area of our lives. So MKs are more connected through FaceTime or WhatsApp or social than they've ever been. But at the same time, you still have these moments where you share these experiences that are the same, these experiences of being different, the experience of a lot like high mobility, like more mobility and travel than most people experience in a lifetime, in short periods of time. Also just living a different kind of life. So those are still the same over, all these years and decades of MKs being MKs. So we see themes of loss, a heightened anxiety, a lack of understanding about our identity, search for belonging, searching for meaning, for purpose. And I think there are a lot of misunderstandings about MKs. So often there's a picture of the missionary family. Wow, your parents are missionaries who are like super spiritual, right? Like their kids must be solid. The kids are probably resilient, adaptable. And sometimes, those things are true, but sometimes it's like, oh, your kids must be super spiritual. They must love the Lord. They must be able to take on anything. And again, some of those characteristics can ring true. MKs do have great strengths and skills and competencies. Like it's really amazing. And they have a global perspective, but also a deep sense of like loss and struggle, often confusion. So it's a bit of a paradox. And one way I like to think about it is like MKs are not an unreached people group, but they're an unthought of people group. You don't think of an MK as someone who needs to hear the gospel or be impacted by the grace of God because they grew up in it, right? But often MKs as missionaries' kids who are ministry kids experience a lot of pressure to be a certain way. So we often call this living under the shoulds. I'm an MK, so I should be a good Christian, or I should love God. I should be able to adapt. I should be able to be okay with change and transition. And so there's this pressure that MKs can feel. And I think that can lead MKs to instinctively blend in with their surroundings. They don't want to be a bother. They don't want to be a burden. They don't want to cause a fuss. And so they can be kind of a hidden people group. So a friend of mine uses the word like hidden immigrant. They're not a traditional immigrant, but a lot of them, when they're coming home to their passport country, some of them have never even lived here. They've never lived in Canada. So I'd say MKs, like all people, have a life experience that's full of like really great stuff and really hard stuff, right? This is all of our story. And this can be magnified, like I said, because of high mobility, because of unstable contexts or countries they lived in, being a part of sometimes a minority religious or just a different religious, cultural, socioeconomic class than people around them where their parents are serving. So that can create a lot of tension. And questions for MKs. So, like I said, MKs are unthought of because at the surface level, you might look at them and say, wow, like that's a well put together person, right? They know how to behave. They know how to act. They know what to say. They have that high adaptability, high global perspective. You might not even know they're an MK because they've blended in so well, right? And again, I'm not saying every MK has like a hidden part of them that's being ignored and these deep-seated issues, but there is a beautiful and rich and unique experience that MKs have that when it's understood can be enjoyed and learned from and used for like good, like the good of the kingdom, right? Because God shows up, right? When we have a perspective of truth. What is the truth of this situation? The good stuff and the hard stuff. We know that is the life of every person, the highs and the lows, right? And so whenever we ignore one part, like whether that's, seeking to minimize the pain and say everything was great, or when we say everything was awful and there was nothing good, right? We lose the beauty of the whole picture. I think that's something that we try to do with the MK Network is create spaces for people to understand that whole perspective because everybody has a story. Every MK comes to our reboot program with a story and varying levels of understanding or processing that's taking place.
That is a lot of high level thinking about the MK experience. And I hear kind of between in the background, everything you're saying, there's this note of caution that we need to be careful not to paint MKs with too broad of a stroke. Not everything will be true for every MK, but I think that idea is so profound that they're the unthought of people group. And I'm just curious if you could sort of walk us through what it looks like for that and how would that impact an MK spiritually?
Yeah, well, I think for some MKs, and I'm going to make some generalizations here, but it's based on my own experience, conversations with people I've mentored, talked to, and so on. Some MKs have experienced pain specifically in the context they lived in cross-culturally or overseas, right? So they've been overseas because of the mission of God, right? Because God has invited their parents to answer the call to go somewhere and do something for God's glory, and so the mission of the gospel can be spread. And so this can lead an MK to feel that God caused this pain that I went through, right? So for instance, I went to boarding school when I was like 10 or 11 years old. Some good things, some hard things, actually a lot of hard things. So this was profoundly challenging for me because it's easy to connect that with the mission of my parents. Well, if my parents weren't on mission, I wouldn't have gone to boarding school and I wouldn't have experienced said pain, right? So it's easy to feel like that just gets lost in the mix, and we're not even allowed to face it or talk about it. Or MKs who are moving back to their passport country, and the majority of people just don't understand, can't relate really to their experience. So it's easy to connect. No one can relate or understand or empathize with me with, well, can God understand or empathize with me, right? So there's that connection with that spiritual journey. When what you see around you influences so much of your perspective, if people can't understand me, can God really understand me? And I actually love that specific example because like Jesus is the ultimate example of someone coming and living cross-culturally, going through the hardships, being misunderstood. So like he can relate to us, but often you don't think about it in that way. I remember when someone did a devotion on like Jesus as like the ultimate TCK, and I was like, wait, what? Like, how does that? I've never heard that. I never heard that take, right? But that's how it kind of connects with that spirituality. So like these are all reasons why processing the unique experience that you've had is so important with your peers, with people who've gone through this, people who can understand like the experience of being different. And yeah, it's just so vital, and it impacts the spirituality in a lot of different ways.
I am just so intrigued by the idea of Jesus being a TCK. If you're unfamiliar with that acronym, TCK is a third culture kid. So that's someone who's grown up globally. I guess I can see like, the incarnation would be that cross-cultural experience, but is that the connection that Jesus is a TCK because of his incarnation, or how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple angles, right? There's the angle TCK being someone who spent their formative years in a culture that was different than either of their parents' culture, right? So there's that like Jesus coming and experiencing this world that is very different than, perfect unity between the Holy Spirit and our Holy Father. But also like the pain and the hardship and living somewhere that's different, where you are different, and going from perfection and holiness to living in dirt and grime and sickness and in poverty and hardship, and then just being misunderstood, by people around you, and having that experience, I think, is so amazing. And I mean, Christ dying on the cross, he felt every bit of pain. And often I think, you think of pain as like the really hard, brutal, whatever pain, but pain is also just like when you have a conversation with someone and you're just clearly not seeing eye to eye. Like, I feel like all of that is sin. All that is brokenness in some form, where everything that's not going the way it should in perfection is a result of the fallenness and the sin of the world. So Christ felt all of that every time, an MK got off the plane and felt that ache for a place that they used to live, or every time they had a conversation with someone who's talking about shinny and they're like, what? I don't even know what shinny, like, I don't know hockey. What is this? Loonies, toonies, Timmies. I don't, they don't necessarily understand these things. Jesus felt all of the brokenness, so he can relate in that way. And he went through, I think, a lot of that misunderstanding. So yeah, I think it's just so important to feel the pain that's been bottled up for MKs, right? To share with someone who truly understands, to gain a new perspective. They're like, God shows up, right? So,
well, what do you think MKs wish the church knew about them? Like, if you're an MK, so potentially you could just speak to this personally, but if there was just like a generic MK that was going to sort of represent the MK experience or the MK needs, what do you think they would want to say to the church directly?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak for all MKs. So all the MKs out there, I would say this: MKs, like, they aren't weird in a bad way. Like, we're not weird in a bad way. We just relate differently at times, right? So a good example of this, and this is what I wanted to share, what I was excited to share earlier, is like an example of this is how MKs, or how do global multicultural people measure intimacy in relationships versus how monocultural people who grew up in a single culture, measure intimacy in relationships. Again, there's some generalizations here, but this principle rings true for a lot of MKs and TCKs and global people, where, if you have a graph, like this, where this is depth and this is time, often you will have, for monocultural people, a very normal way to measure intimacy is by time, right? So I met this person and we kind of hung out one time. We went to Timmy's, went to a movie, went to a hockey game. Slowly, a graph, just like a normal graph, it'll go deeper and deeper in intimacy. And you'll often hear a monocultural person say, oh, I know I'm close with so-and-so. I know I'm close with Maggie because we've known each other for 10 years. It's a very common phrase or sentiment that you'll hear from people. And then on the flip side of that, for the MK or the TCK, often they'll measure intimacy by depth. So they'll start here, but very quickly they'll go down here because they measure intimacy by depth as opposed to measuring intimacy by time. And there's a lot of nuance and complexity to it, but I remember when I was in my first year at volunteering at Reboot, Maggie, and I saw that graph and I was like, oh my goodness, this is why I am the way that I am, because I instinctively want to go deeper in a relationship. And this, for MKs, again, comes from this, like, could come from high mobility, chaotic or, disrupted context that they lived in. But there's this, like, I might be gone soon. I got to go deep in relationship. And so I guess I'd want the church to know, like, hey, when an MK is going super deep in relationship, super fast, have some grace for them. Like, they're not just trying to be abrupt or obnoxious or insensitive. This is just this is their natural way of developing intimacy and friendship. It's just a bit of a faster rate. And again, on the flip side for MKs, hey, MKs out there, this is the opportunity for you to have patience. And so this is one of the things that we talk about at our retreats is, like, have patience in a relationship, learn the beauty and the benefits of stability and long-term relationship and having boundaries and not feeling like you just need to go deep every time. So that's a big one. I think, MKs have a unique experience that they'd probably like to share, but probably not for 4.5 minutes in the church foyer after the service. Like, that's probably not the best context for going deep, because that is one of the most painful things, I think, for multicultural people, whether you're an immigrant or a TCK or, an MK TCK, where someone says, like, oh, you grew up in Niger. That's so interesting. And then you give them about 33 seconds to share about their life in Niger. And so there's this huge part of their life that they would love to share, but they need the right context. And so I think my recommendation is like, have an MK for coffee, give them some time, like an hour to share their story. Like have a few good questions. A couple good questions off the top of my head. Like, what is something about your host culture, the culture you grew up in, that has become a part of you? Like, that's a great question. Or like, give me like a day in the life of growing up in Thailand. Like, paint me a picture. What was it like? What did you eat? Where did you go to school? Like, what was it like? Or like, what was one of the funniest things that happened to you living overseas? Like, these are some good questions that you can ask that just like open the door. Not like, aren't you so glad to be home? That's not a good question, because home is a touchy subject for MKs, because they're like, what is home? Like, oh, but also like many of them, like I said, a lot of MKs are born overseas. So they got a Canadian passport, but they grew up in Africa or Asia or Europe or somewhere else. And, they've probably come back, on home assignment or sabbatical. But again, don't assume anything. I think just like go in with curiosity. And I think honestly, this practice of like sharing our story is something that has huge benefits in the church, not just for MKs, but like intentionally all of us sharing our story. And again, MKs have the gift or the strength of being willing to go to certain places. And they often need that. That can be a benefit for your church. It can be a benefit for a small group or for a discipleship group, where they're willing to go in and they can model that. Well, again, they also need to learn the boundaries and learn sensitivity and patience and some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a great way to sort of teach an MK those things and welcome them into like a genuine relationship is to also be willing to share your story with them. I think it's great to have those questions and to be ready to really listen and engage with their testimony, their story, their life. But then also be generous in sharing about your own life. What are the things that have made you who you are? Because those may not be experiences that they actually have witnessed or seen or understand. And your willingness to share like, hey, these are the things that make me. These are the things in Canada or in the States, wherever you're listening to this, that have influenced my faith and my life and whatnot. That's also going to help them integrate into your culture in their passport country. So I want to encourage you, as you're considering those questions to ask, also be thinking about how you could answer them. They might not ask. They might not be ready to listen. But if they are, then seize the opportunity to be generous and kind and to reward their sharing and their depth with your own, I think.
Yeah, you really honor them by giving them the space to share their story. And again, as Maggie just joked, they might not ask because maybe they might have never, this might be the first opportunity they've ever had to share their story, where someone said, hey, tell me your story, and just gave them the space to share. Because so many of their interactions, again, have been, oh, you grew up in so-and-so country. That must have been weird. Or what was that like? And then, oh, I got to run, pick up my kids or whatever it is. Right. And so again, it's not for negative reasons, but it's just that like awareness and that opportunity that can be so valuable.
So how would you encourage the church? I think we're already in this conversation a little bit, but how would you encourage the church as they seek to engage with MKs really meaningfully and they work to understand them rightly, to kind of see past some of the misunderstandings we've touched on today, and ensure that MKs are thought of, right? We don't want to leave them as the unthought of people group. As they make that effort, how would you encourage them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think seeing them and their experiences as an asset, like they can be like bridge builders. They have so many competencies. Again, hearing their stories, building relationships. One of the taglines at the More Network is ministry at the speed of relationships. And I think this is, as someone who worked in the church in the past, I wish someone had told me this 10 years ago, where it's like ministry at the speed of relationships. God gives us the gift of relationships. Every relationship moves at a different speed, but, we have this gift to know each other and be known, to genuinely care for each other, and then do the ministry out of that, so to take that time and prioritize that relationship. Just encourage them to become a part of the MK network, the Canadian MK network, if they live in Canada, and, get support, serve, connect, get the care they need through like a reentry retreat or finding a mentor, because they have a lot to offer.
To clarify, you're encouraging the church to encourage MKs to be a part of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When you're talking to MKs, like encourage them to get connected with us and give them opportunities to get connected.
Yeah, community is such a crucial part of healing and learning and growing and adapting. And absolutely. Do you have any resources that you would like to recommend to our listeners? Like, are there books or podcasts or webinars or anything like that the More Network has put out, or that you would recommend if perhaps they have an MK in their church that they're like, oh, we gotta get better at taking care of this kid, but we don't know where to start? Or if they want to just be preemptive and they're curious to learn more, what would you recommend?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is connecting them with another MK, because there is a shared experience that is so critical and so valuable to them being able to process and understand themselves. And I just love, there's a story that I share all the time because it's amazing. And my friend Aaron is a Green Bay Packers fan, like a legit super fan. And he tells me the story. He was working in the Rocky Mountains, driving like a shuttle bus for one of the resorts. And he has this Green Bay Packers hat that he wears religiously. Well, not religiously. He sometimes wears it. Anyways, and so he was trading shifts with this other shuttle bus driver, and he was going to take over the shift, and he opened the door to the bus. And my friend Aaron had his hat on, and the guy says, "Green Bay Packers, you're not a Packers fan, are you?" He's like, "Yeah, I am." And he's like, "No, you're not. Tell me 5 of the players." And so Aaron, carries on to share 5 of the most obscure players, plus their stats, plus their hometowns, plus their best friend's favorite ice cream flavor, whatever. Like, he just knew all the stuff. And Aaron describes this moment as something happened when he knew that I was like him. Like, these were both super fans, and they both had this shared experience. And he's like, something happened. I knew I didn't need to convince him. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to justify my experience, and I would say the same, that rings true for MKs, where it's like when they get to connect with another MK in a good, healthy context, they can have that moment of like, oh, like, you get it. Like, you're like me. And so I think that's a big, if you have those relationships you can connect them with, that's awesome. That's really important. There's some really good literature on MKs. So Pieces of Purple is a book written by Michelle Phoenix. And I would highly recommend it just to grow your perspective and understanding on, and your compassion for MKs. That's a really great one. Again, I think MKs can be some of the most impactful volunteers, leaders, friends, but they just need that love and investment. So mentor them, invest in them, and again, encourage them to become a part of the MK network. We're a resource. We're growing and creating spaces for MKs and non-MKs to serve and, help MKs thrive and be healthy so they can serve the mission of God.
Well, we always give our guests an opportunity to speak directly to the churches that we have listening. Is there anything you'd like to say to them?
I would say that MKs are people. We're people. We have dreams and desires and gifts to use for the kingdom. And as someone who lived a large portion of my life not understanding my MK-ness or MK, that part of my life, and not even thinking it was significant, I just thought, now I'm here and I got to figure this out. Giving them the opportunity to understand that experience and enjoy it. And I believe it'll yield fruit for the kingdom. So I think just love MKs, give them space to share, to be known, honor their story, the story of God in their life. I'd also say one more thing is that not all MKs are children. So like I'm in my 30s, I'm still an MK. It's still such a big part of who I am. It's not all of who I am, of course, but there are MKs who are 40, 50, 60 years old, who could benefit from the resources of the MK network, who could become mentors, who maybe need mentors. This is still part of their life, whether they like it or not, that impacts them and affects the way they live and move in the world. So again, I just encourage you, recommend that MKs become a part of the MK network, and they can learn and grow and can connect them with resources and relationships that'll help them.
Yeah. So if we have listeners today who are in Canada and they do want to get involved with the MK Network, how can they do that? And then also for our listeners who are abroad, and if they have questions or they want to touch base with you at all, they want to follow up from something you said, how could they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best site to find information would be more.outreach.ca. So that's the More Network site. On there, you can find information for Reboot. If you type in that same site and then do /CMKN, so Canadian MK Network, you'll find more MK specific resources. And that second one I mentioned is more geared towards MK. So you can just direct MKs directly there. Give me an email, Josh Gamble, jgamble@outreach.ca.
Josh, thank you so much for being with us here today at the Global Missions Podcast.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that this was an encouragement to you. And as always, if you have questions or comments and you want to follow up with anyone from our team, you can email us at info@globalmissionstoolbox.com. This podcast is produced by the Global Missions Toolbox, and we hope that you'll check out our website and the resources that we've collected and created for you. Join us again in 2 weeks when we will continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.